Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and we're now entering my 200s. This is episode 201, which I'm calling Fathers and Sons. Not really an homage to D.H. Lawrence as such, but it does bear some resemblance. I'm not going to make a terribly long video this time because I've got so much to do. And the reason that this one is called Fathers and Sons is because I am helping my son make a transition from teaching English in high school in China to doing a PhD at Binghamton University, which is one of the 4 university centers of the SUNY system, where I used to teach for 30 plus years. And it's a big change for him, and one of the significant immediate changes that is causing, I don't know about with him, but with me, a certain amount of stress, I guess, is that he's having to leave his wife behind in China. They've been married for 5 years, and he's not been able to help her enough to secure a visa because of the pandemic and the fact that she's from China and all these various things means that he is having to leave her behind and go and start his PhD. And for some reason, which I want to talk about in this video, that is the part that stresses me. I left him out to his own devices 10 years ago. I went off to Argentina, and he was in his 2nd year at university. He did fine, I did fine, everything was fine. And then we moved about the place. Eventually he ended up in China, I ended up in China, we got back together and all kinds of things. I left China, I went and taught in Italy. He stayed in China, and eventually he got married. And whilst I was actually traveling from Italy to Slovenia, he announced one evening, called me up and said, "Oh, by the way, Dad, I'm getting married on Friday." And it was Tuesday. But it put my mind at rest, because it meant that he had a support mechanism, and now he doesn't. So I want to talk about that. So I was really taken completely by surprise when 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, his anniversary was on the 8th of this month. For those of you who know Chinese culture, you'll know that 8 is a lucky number, very similar to 7 in English culture. So 8 is auspicious, so they chose the 8th of July to get married. So they got married 5 years ago. I was working in Italy, but it was my summer vacation, so I was wandering around with a friend of mine, and we were just about to cross over from Trieste in northern Italy into Slovenia and then up into Austria. And he calls me on the phone and says how I'm getting married. He might have waited longer, but he had a plan at that point to go and spend a year studying Korean in South Korea, because one of his interests is Tang Soo Do, which is a Korean martial art. He'd been studying it since he was 5 years old, and he's a 4th Dan black belt at this point. In fact, he could be a 5th Dan black belt or a Korean grandmaster if he wanted to be, but he's been doing other things. But anyway, he wanted to travel to Korea and spend a year studying there, and he wanted his girlfriend, which I had no idea about, to go with him, but she couldn't go with him. She couldn't get a visa for a year unless they were married. And so, and instead of doing the common Chinese habit of having all kinds of wedding photos, which you do months and months in advance with different clothes that you actually hire from a photographic studio. They take all the photos, and then they have a ceremony, very small ceremony, just the bride and groom, their parents, and the bridal party, bridegroom and his groomsmen and the bridesmaids and the bride and all of that, but very small, and various traditional ritual things they do. She's at home. She's usually in traditional red and gold, and she has to hide from, like there's a lot of stuff that goes on, but this is all very private. And then a little later, they have a big banquet, and they show a video and or photographs of the ceremony itself, and there's another whole elaborate ceremony run by a master of ceremonies involving the couple having their parents giving speeches and toasts and lots of food and goodness knows what else. Well, they just did the first part, that just the paper, the official part, so that they would be married. And they were going to have the big blowout later, and they never did. I guess they were going to do it a year later, but they were in Korea. They were talking about everyone going to Korea, and the families couldn't get visas, and so it dragged on, and then it never happened. Then they went back to China, and my son got a job, first of all, just teaching English, as he had been doing before that, and as I had been doing as well. But then finally, instead of just teaching English at language schools, he got a permanent job at a high school teaching English, which meant he had to get a whole new set of work visas, because the government had begun clamping down on illegal immigrants teaching and whatnot. So he'd gone back to the United States and done a lot of paperwork, and then back to China. So he's been doing that now for about, 3 years, I guess. Yeah, around 3 years. Because last time I remember when he was going over to the United States, he was having to do all kinds of bureaucratic nonsense, and I happened to be in Kyrgyzstan at the time, and he calls me up and he says, I'm having these problems. So fortunately I was with a whole bunch of people who had connections in the United States and in China, and I was able to make all kinds of calls, and we got a certain amount done. But he still ended up going to the United States, still ended up going again and again and again to the Chinese embassy in New York and so on. So finally he got settled, he's got an apartment, they've been together for 5 years. I visited finally, and they visited me here in Cambodia, and her mother as well, not her father. Her father doesn't like to travel, but her mother came. And then I think 2 years ago, I guess, I went up to Kunming and I met her parents. We had dinner together, and so it's all fine. And I felt like my son was just in a really secure place, because in New York we did all right when my wife was alive. He could get ferried around to his various things. He played in the town band, trumpet, and he went to karate lessons and various things. And I could take him sometimes, and my wife took him sometimes, and he went to a Montessori school for a while, and we shared the driving to the school. And then when he went to public school, we often walked there together, and I would pick him up, or my wife would pick him up, and and everything worked out fine. And then after 5th grade, I homeschooled him. So there wasn't so much ferrying around to and from school, but there was still a lot of work with getting him to the band, getting him to karate tournaments, various things. And then when he was 15, my wife died of cancer. And so very quickly afterwards, he actually turned 16 about, let me think, it was about 2 months after my wife died. He turned 16. And so the first thing that I did was to sign him up for driving lessons, so that after my sabbatical, I was on sabbatical when my wife died, which was very convenient, but I wanted to make sure that my son could drive a car, so that when I had to go back to teaching, he would be able to drive himself to band, to karate. He went to karate 4, 5, sometimes 6 times a week, certainly 5 times, and he was teaching by that point. And he was a new driver. and my wife had died, and so there was me and him at home, and that was it. And it was a terribly difficult time. And I remember feeling just really stressed out every time I had to be somewhere, and he got into the car to drive to, let's say, karate. And I made sure that he phoned me, before he left home, when he arrived at karate, when he left from karate, when he got home. I just wanted to be absolutely certain, because he was a brand new driver, and I'd lost my wife. I didn't want to lose my son as well, but it was just us. And see, then when he got married in China, it made me feel so much better, because not only did he have a wife at home, but he also had her parents, and not only her parents, but her uncles and aunts, her cousins, grandparents, just a whole big family. So it'd gone from having me as the one family member to a huge number, and so I felt really much better about him. I felt like he was now grounded. And then this came, where he has to just leave Asia on his own, travel to to Los Angeles, then New York, and then up to Binghamton, find an apartment by himself, get himself hooked up with his professors by himself. He has to do everything by himself. And he left yesterday. He left Kunming. He took a train. It's very strange. I don't think I can draw a map. I might be able to also. A very strange route. He took a train from Kunming to Chengdu yesterday, and now, right as I'm doing this video, he's flying from Chengdu to Guangzhou, which is near Hong Kong, which is very strange. It's sort of like going all the way up north and then going back down south. And then from Guangzhou he's going to fly to Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles he's going to fly to New York. And what I've been feeling is exactly the same feelings that I had when he was first driving at the age of 16. Like, he's all on his own, and I can't do much to help because I'm a long way away, but he's promised to keep in touch. And so when he got to the train station in Kunming, he sent me a message and he said, I'm in Kunming at the train station. And then when he got to Chengdu, he said, okay, I'm in my hotel in Chengdu. And then this morning he said, okay, my flight is at 4 o'clock. I'm going to get to the airport early. When he got to the airport, he sent me a message. Then when he was on the plane, he sent me a message, and I'm waiting for the next message. He'll be transferring from a domestic flight to an international flight, and it's a 15-hour flight to Los Angeles, so that's a big one. And it just all brings back these memories, the emotions of being so concerned about his well-being and not being able to do anything about it, which had been like resting for a really long time because he was married and his wife could look after him and his in-laws were there to take care of him. I mean, he still, of course, he still asked me for money and for other favors all the time. But he had people there on a day-to-day basis, and he doesn't anymore. He's traveling alone, and he was he's very competent at all of those things. I'm not worried about that part of it. It's the emotional part, which brings me to my question, which is, where does that come from? Is that built into me genetically as a father, or did I learn it? Or both, of course, mixture. But how do you learn those things? How do you learn emotions? How do you learn the emotion of feeling concerned for somebody else? And it's not just it's not cognitive at all. It's in the pit of my stomach and in my throat. It's a physical, embodied feeling. Where does that come from? And why does it throw me back? Now it's 15 years. He's nearly 30 years old. So it throws me all the way back to when he was a teenager learning to drive. Why? Well, I don't have any good answers, but it brings back up my original title of Fathers and Sons. It's a very, very complicated relationship between fathers and sons. Now, I can't say anything about fathers plural and sons plural. I can only speak to me as a father and my son as a son. And it's not something that ever can vanish or disappear or change. Well, it can change, but it can't go away. It's there for good. And those feelings will be there for good. And they're somewhat surprising feelings. Maybe it's also being magnified by the pandemic, that I live on my own, so I don't have much else to think about. And I'm certainly glad that he thinks it's important to message me wherever he is. You know, here I am at the airport, Dad. I'm on the plane, Dad, and so on. Makes me feel like a father. So there it is, a ramble of sorts. I don't know whether you want to press the like button or subscribe button at this point, or tell your friends, because this is just a real personal wander in the woods. But if you do feel like it, then please like, please subscribe. And I imagine I'll do some cooking on Tuesday, but I don't know. So have a good weekend.